So, Jairo, thanks a lot for the introduction, and thanks you all for waiting for this inconvenience. Sorry for that. And also, big thank to Mas and Binghai that they allowed me to bring a short presentation here. It will be just 20 minutes, I guess, something like that. But I hope that I will make at least Mas a bit happy, because I will try to address in this talk one of his questions which he supposed in the beginning of this wonderful workshop. And this was whether we are able to somehow manipulate actually Dirac fermions. And motivation, or he also said that this meeting should be a bit about dreaming. So the motivation came actually from two parts. One is from the industry, because in a group of Tomáš Jungwirth, we were able to show during last few years that it's now possible to manipulate by electrical currents antiferromagnetic order. And we have shown it experimentally and also theoretically. And besides that, from fundamental point of view of physics, there is a lot of interesting relativistic physics, which in the end could be also a bit of artistics, as I wanted to stress by this Escher picture. So the basic question which I want to address is whether we can two subfields of solid-state physics which emerge in recent years and are based on relativity, whether we can measure them somehow. And these are topological semimetals on the one hand, and on the other hand, spin orbitronics. And there is also a third one stream, which I actually argue that can resolve this, and this is antiferromagnetic spintronics. Because antiferromagnet seems to have very specific symmetries, which make a huge advantage over ferromagnets, for instance. So this was, so the red part was discussed a lot, so I will not discuss it anymore because the whole workshop is about it. And the blue part are these spin orbitorks, which originally proposed by Andrej and the others for ferromagnets, where 2 years ago by Tomáš proposed also for antiferromagnets. And as I have shown on the previous slide, it was now experimentally not only demonstrated, but it was actually built a real device, which is able to right now write just 1 bit, but still it's amazing to write into antiferromagnet by electrical currents a bit. The problem here is that on the first side, the systems seems to be incompatible. Just if you look at the symmetries of them, usually you need for spin orbitorks broken symmetries to induce, to actually have something like inverse spin galvanic effect. In the relativistic fermions, on the other hand, Dirac semimetals were never suggested to be magnetic, up to actually contribution from Peyze, we have seen yesterday. And while semimetals, actually there was a pioneering work on antiferromagnets, where in this pyrochlorid iridase in 2011, people introduced actually the notion of Weyl semimetal in solid-state physics. But these systems are central symmetric, so they are not incompatible with this non-central symmetric physics. Besides the spin orbitorks, there is a whole bunch of other effects which are interesting once you have some symmetries broken. So we were looking whether it's possible to find materials which will be on this overlap. And we have found such materials, and I will be speaking about it. There will also very briefly appear a paper. So I claim that it's possible to resolve this, this problem in antiferromagnets. And here I place like very rough cookbook or recipe how to approach it actually. So the first point is that if you think about the analogy with graphene, so you in antiferromagnets usually introduce doubling or some multiplying the unit cell. So then in the reciprocal space you have a folding of bands. And then you can expect that under some additional conditions you can have some crossings. And these crossings could be in the end Weyl or Dirac, of Weyl or Dirac nature. Then the second point is that last year, and we have seen already a lot of talks about non-symmetric symmetries, these symmetries could actually stabilize these crossings in band structures. Then, because we have the antiferromagnetic order, you have typically pseudo gap in the band structure. And actually, this was how the whole field of antiferromagnetic spintronics started in last few years. It was that we were actually trying to find semiconductors, so materials which have a gap in a band structure. So, of course, then it's very appealing to find materials where there will be only just the kissing of the bands. And there are, if you look into the literature, you can find some interesting band structure already. So for instance, there is from Tomáš Group 3 or 4 years old paper by Maca, where you can see these relativistic bank crossings. So by this analysis, we identified basically a whole family of antiferromagnets, which this material is a specific example. I have chosen this one for several reasons. One reason is that we were able to prepare it in lab. Another reason is that on this material, it turns out that actually this is the material on which tetragonal version was actually experimentally proven to have these spin orbit torques. And there are a bunch of other reasons, but they are not that much important. So here starts actually my contribution, so my calculations. So first we were looking what is really the ground state, magnetic ground state, and also the orientation of the antiferromagnetic moment, because it turns out that all of the nice properties which I will be speaking in the second part of the talk are extremely or are dramatically depending on not only which antiferromagnetic texture you have, but also in which direction you have this antiferromagnetic texture. So we have calculated ground state properties and magnetic anisotropy energy by several techniques, and we arrive at the conclusions which are somehow consistent with experimental data which are available on these materials. And I will start with the band structure of the tetragonal variant. The tetragonal variant of the copper manganese arsenic has just two magnetic moments in the unit cell, and here you can see comparison of two approximations. So one is GGA and one is GGA plus U. U again you can include by many different techniques. So I compare like 3 different techniques, and you can see that the main effect is that you actually are able to shift some Dirac points in the band structure closer or further from the Fermi energy. But you can also expect that in a real material where you will have some impurities or things like that, we also are doing CPA calculations. We can, even by this or many other band structure engineering, manipulate these Dirac fermions. Anyway, they are pretty close to the Fermi energy. So if you look here or here, you are at the level of 0.1 electron volt. So, but important thing to notice is that that because of this semi-metallic nature, which you can see also in transport measurements, you have still not negligible density of states at the Fermi level. So you still have there are some states, but they are pretty small. And in the orthorhombic case, we actually have this great signature of topological semi-metal, because without including U, the band crossings appears almost exactly at the Fermi level. And by introducing the electronic correlations into the game, they are just slightly shifting, mostly by 0.1 electron volts maximum into the higher energies. So this means that if somebody would try to measure it in ARPES or any other technique, one should really see at least this Dirac fermionic nature of these materials. The important point here to notice is that this orthorhombic antiferromagnet has more sublattices. So actually the spin orbit torques in this material are slightly more involved, and the results of the analysis of the symmetry of the spin orbit torque is in this picture. We basically identify 3 mechanisms which can manipulate the antiferromagnetic order in this material. And once more, it's important to say that this is strictly dependent on the ground state magnetic structure, and also on the landscape of the magnetic anisotropy energy. So what are these 3 scenarios? So first scenario is actually using field-like torque, which can manipulate either towards xy plane or inside xy plane in both of these materials. And the first scenario is that you can have an anti-damping-like term, which usually tends to be smaller than field-like term in this kind of materials, and we see also this in first principles calculations. However, there will be also a paper by Jacob, where he is showing for other class of materials that by some band structure engineering, we can tune field-like to be smaller than anti-damping like, and then we can actually expect also tilting from the XY plane. And also because the magnetic anisotropy energy in this class of materials is very small, it's like fractions of milli-eV. So this means that also by proper band structure engineering, we can tune even that. So we can start from different than the ground state direction of the moments, and by spin orbit torques rotate them. So important thing now, how to realize the control of these Dirac fermions in these materials is that once you start to manipulate the antiferromagnetic order, you will change the magnetic groups. So actually in this diagram, you can think about it as the coordinates of Néel vector. So if you go, for instance, from this direction to 1, 1, 1 direction, you lose almost all symmetries. So from 8 symmetries, you end up with 2 symmetries. If you go to this point, you have still 8 symmetries, but different one. So it's so then if you look at the Brillouin zone, you will have protections, and you expect stable band crossings at the different manifolds in this Brillouin zone. So by this, we are now able to calculate from first principles how exactly these Dirac fermions will open and close. So Pejse was yesterday greatly explaining the nature of Dirac fermions in this orthorhombic variant. So I will just briefly mention the Dirac fermions in the tetragonal one. So in the tetragonal one, because of this not pure band touching nature, we have much more states, and these much more states introduce much more Dirac fermions. And we have also more symmetries. Instead of 8 symmetries maximum, we have 16 symmetries in this material, in this point group. So we eventually have, even with spin orbit coupling, we have Dirac nodal lines in the band structure. And these Dirac fermions are actually showing very great linear dispersion among 2 directions always. But in the third one, there is actually something reminiscent of crystalline topological insulators, which comes, if you think about it slightly, probably from the folding of the bands. And now, how is looking the control of these fermions? So I will just mention 2 most important ones. So in the tetragonal one, the most appealing case is that for the switching which we actually see in the experiment from the 100 direction to 110 direction, this is this picture, there is an opening and closing a gap. So for this scenario, we have spin orbit torques confirmed. We just need to see somehow the opening and closing. On the other hand, in orthorhombic case, the most appealing situation is either along z direction or x direction. In the z direction, we have here protection of this Dirac fermion. However, for any departure from this strict z direction, there will be some opening. So for instance, if we go towards to xy plane, there will be a band gap of 15 milli-eV approximately. Interesting here is that on this Dirac cone, we haven't found any protection mechanism. However, due to the chemistry of the bands and which orbitals are participating in the game, we see that there is a very small band gap, which probably in the experiment would be behaving completely as a not gapped phase. So there is effectively also a second Dirac fermion on this this manifold for orientation of the staggered moment along x direction. So it's definitely possible to control these fermions. The problem is that these band gaps are small. So I have read in the recent papers on photoemission studies that the smallest resolution is around 10 milli-eV, which makes sense. I don't know. They are experts. They can tell me more about this topic. However, for instance, in this tetragonal, if you look at the scale, there are gaps even up to 40 millieV. So at least these gaps for opening and closing should be seen in these measurements. The second point is that because we have a whole class of antiferromagnets with the same symmetry, we can also go farther in the periodic table and use materials with larger spin-orbit coupling. And last point to mention is that by this mechanism we are able, in the orthorhombic one, not only control the Dirac fermions, but also the whole phase. Because since we, for some particular orientation of staggered moment, kill all of the magnetic symmetries, we are actually left with a semiconducting phase. In contrary with some high symmetry directions where we see this Dirac semi-metal phase. So by this, let me summarize briefly the results. We have actually answered the question whether it is possible to combine relativistic fermions and spin-orbit torques. On top of that, we even propose a mechanism based on the spin-orbit torques how to manipulate these Dirac fermions and topological phases. And here are a few suggestions for the experiment. I wanted to stress by this that we have seen all the time that a lot of things are actually happening, and theory and ab initio calculations are playing a huge role, that they are even able to lead experiment, as you can see from this table, when these effects were discovered by calculations and when they were observed in the experiment. So by this, thank you very much for your attention.